Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're here to dive into the fascinating world of wax seals, a practice with rich historical roots that, if you're anything like me, still captures our imagination today. If you're completely new to an interest in wax seals, however, you are in the right spot. We're going to start with some basic information, tying that into Anne Lister's use of wax seals a little bit, and then have some time to do a demonstration, or if you had a chance to check out the recommended supplies list ahead of time and came prepared, hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end to share some examples or try something new. So obviously we're at an Anne Lister themed conference, but I do think Anne Lister's legacy offers a captivating lens through which to explore this historic and symbolic dimension of wax seals, simply because she documented so many of her own practices and left behind a significant volume of correspondence in addition to her journals. So I think she's a great entry point for enriching our understanding of this age-old art form. To begin, what exactly are wax seals? In purely practical terms, they're discs of wax. So traditionally beeswax affixed to a document as a form of authentication. The seal itself serves both as a signature and as a security measure, ensuring that the document remains unopened and unread until it reaches its intended recipient. There are several classes of seals, each with its own specific use. So some of you being familiar with Anne Lister, having looked at other older documents, archival documents, may recognize signet seals. So these were owned by individuals and used akin to a personal signature. Many times they're engraved with family crests or coats of arms into rings, sometimes also a fob for a pocket watch or a pendant that could be attached to a necklace. I couldn't get permission to publish it in this presentation, but there's a beautiful photo of a seal that Anne Lister used resembling a coat of arms that she had cut that looks really similar to the one used in her book plate, which I do have an image of on screen here. And so hopefully we'll drop a link in the chat. You can see that seal or a photo of it in the Anne Lister profile on Packed with Potential. Next up, we have official seals. So these were used by institutions like churches or governments and would lend a document its legal credibility. Often these are much larger, as you can see, with some kind of official emblem. And from the images on screen, you can see the large one on the left is fairly well preserved from the New York Library, New York Public Library. And these are some documents conveying land to John Lister. And on the right, we've got a few that didn't hold up so well. On the custody grants for Eliza Reign in 1818 and 1840. But you can see the size of them and the tins used to try to preserve some of those pieces. Another example, much smaller example of official seals is that there was also a practice of signing official documents with a seal next to signatures. So this is a deed conveying Anne Lister's estates to her trustees, William Gray, Robert Parker, and John Rawson in 1854. And if I can remember, and I think you can kind of see in the close-up photo there, that all of these signatures are actually signed next to the same seal. So it's probably one belonging to a lawyer or someone witnessing those signatures. It's not like they would have each brought their own signet seal or something to come and sign this, but nonetheless, the seal was part of this, official practice. Corporate seals are another class of seals. So these are a couple modern examples, but corporate seals could be employed by companies using their logo as an emblem. I have a couple examples here, like the Brandywine Coffee Roasters, and of course the Packed with Potential logo. Returning to Anne's time though, during the 19th century, the process of creating these seals was already both an art and a ritual. Sticks of wax would be heated over a candle or lamp, and either letting the wax drip to the document or pressing the stick into the document. And while the wax was still soft, a stamp, often made of metal or would be pressed into it to leave an impression, rendering the seal unique and unforgettable. And part of the reason I say this method was really like an art form in its practice is that the choice of material that made up the stamp, the material of the handle, sometimes a particular kind of stone that the engraving would be cut into, as well as the design of the impression, could all be very specifically chosen to reflect the owner or to imbue each piece of correspondence with specific meaning. As you can imagine, like in other areas of Anne's life, she was meticulous with her use of wax seals. So for her, the choice of paper, the color of wax, the design of the stamp were not mere trivialities, but a lot of times meaningful decisions. So Often in her journals, she would also document her process of selecting mottos or materials that she was having seals cut into. And I wanted to share a couple examples from her collection that stand out. So this one is a special seal that was a gift from her mother, portraying a devoted pelican nourishing its young, which was a symbol often associated with sacrifice and care. Anne wrote about its significance being her favorite seal when she thought she lost it one day in 1824, as you can see. Not to worry, the seal was found while she was making the bed the next day. So, so luckily we do still have some examples that remain where we can see the pelican seal. As I said, often seals would be really thoughtfully chosen. And so, of course, made perfect sense to be a thoughtfully chosen gift to someone else. Sabella McLean gifted Anne a seal with the engraving of a thistle and the motto, "Do Not Forget," into a stone that was cut from her father's property, used with a fob of some sort that contained a lock of her hair, as she noted to Anne in a letter from 1822. And while I couldn't get permission to share an example of the "Do Not Forget" seal today, I think if you keep an eye on the Sabella McLean profile, you may see it soon. I've heard rumblings. But there's also currently a nice photo of her own thistle and rose seal there as well. So again, maybe we'll have a link in the chat to the Sabella profile. So the photo that I do have, though, is an example of one that looks really similar to that seal that has been pressed to make a necklace. And you can see a couple examples of similar items that have like a hinged door, like the one Sabella mentions in the passage on screen as being stiff, that could have contained a surprise like a lock of hair or photo. Thistles themselves are emblematic of guardianship and remembrance, and often accompanied sentiments like "Do not forget me." So the pairing with "Do Not Forget" was fairly popular. Anne also commented to her journal that she looked upon it with many a feeling of interest and regard. "'Tis a pretty idea altogether, and such as can scarcely be lost upon a heart like mine." So you can tell that these little touches with symbolism and imbued meanings were valued by Anne Lister. Anne also noted to herself and to Vere, Sabella's niece, that she would leave her this seal as a gift of remembrance should she herself pass away before Vere, which, as we know, did happen. Whether Vere got the seal, I'm unsure of. But as In Search of Anne Walker noted, when she was mourning Anne Lister after her death, there are documents in the National Archives that show Anne Walker paid Anne Lister's estate £15 for a gold watch and ring for Vere Cameron, which may very well have been the watch Anne Lister mentions, leaving her in the entry from March 1831. If Lister did indeed make that memorandum, it could have just been that Anne Walker was executing those wishes by buying the watch and ring from Anne's estate to ensure Vere got them. And I'm also a little personally curious if perhaps the ring that's noted in those accounts as accompanying the watch may have been the item with the "Do Not Forget" seal containing Sabella's hair. I don't know. This is pure speculation, but something that's fun to think about when you see these mentions in the journal and then come across other documents like accounts that mention the stuff like that. So Anne herself also made meaningful gifts of seals. She visited no less than 3 seal cutters while she was in Paris in 1825, acquiring estimates for a seal she wanted to commission for Sabella in return. She wrote multiple times that she wanted a seal cut with a violet and hedge or tuft of grass with the motto, "Il faut me chercher," meaning "I must be sought," which she did send her cut into an amethyst surface. And for Anne Walker's birthday, she chose a bloodstone carving with the inscription "Faith is everything" in block letters on a scroll. Again, that is another particular image I don't have permission to share in this presentation today, but you can see a beautiful photo of that seal as either the header image on the wax seals and stamps tracker page. Hopefully we'll get a link to that in the chat. And then there's also some photos in Anne Walker's profile on Pact with Potential. Again, just couldn't get them approved for use in today's presentation. If you remember yesterday's copyright session, it's complicated. So along those same lines, there are some letters with Sabella's cherché seal that remain, but I have heard that there's some copyright issues with Malario, which is the seal maker Anne actually mentions in this passage on screen. So wouldn't be able to show you an image of that either, but you can find some mentions of it in the wax seal tracker. And if you wanted to use those items to then check out that correspondence in the archive, if you're so lucky to make a visit, then that could be an option to get a peek at those. Anne's letters and journals also document the use of black wax and black edged paper during periods of mourning. So she once wrote, "I shall seal this letter with black because my heart shares the feeling of yours." And you can see that Anne, again, engaged with these practices as a nuanced form of personal expression rather than just functional tools for sealing her correspondence. I also wanted to include a few seals that didn't belong to Anne, but she received from friends and lovers that we know of through her journals. So on the left is a red seal from Eliza Rain, reading Pensez à moi, think of me. And then to the right is an example of one Isabella Norcliffe used. Again, no luck with permissions for this presentation, but I've substituted a sketch Chantel Smith did for an Inktober or Waxtober challenge we did in 2021, asking people to draw seals based on their descriptions in the tracker. And Chantel actually has a photo of this one from one of her archive visits that you can see on the wax seal page. So her sketch is pretty accurate, but it depicts Tibbs quiet without, active within motto and clock face. So perhaps that gives us a little insight into her personality. Although some of the correspondence we have from Anne Walker also makes it clear that sometimes people may have also used seals out of convenience rather than necessarily always having, some kind of imbued symbolism. So there's some great photos of her seals, as I mentioned, in the Anne Walker profile. There's one using her initials with an AW, the Faith is All seal that I mentioned. And then while she was in Scotland in 1833, she used the seal of her brother-in-law, Captain George Mackay, which bore his coat of arms and the motto "Without Fear." But even during the years when Anne Walker is residing at Shipton Hall, she frequently used Anne Lister's own seals, despite having her own collection at hand. So you might recognize Anne Lister's red pelican seal that we saw previously on this letter from Anne Walker to her sister Elizabeth in 1835. She may have chosen it for some of that same familial symbolism of sacrifice and care, or perhaps it was just one that was within reach. So another thing that we get from the journals is sometimes Anne's thoughts on how other people are using their seals. She had an opinion about everything, obviously. So for example, we have this little insight into Mary Valence based on Anne's description of her Liberté seal that she used, which Anne disapproved of, for a lady in England. I don't personally know enough about what the connotation there she was disapproving of, but it doesn't surprise me to see Anne judging other people for their wax seals. So I don't have an example of the Mary Valence seal, but this is an example of another Liberté inscription carved into a stone and used on a fob, just to give you an idea of what some of those may have looked like. An evolution of sealing methods that started to appear during Anne's time was the use of adhesive paper or wafer seals. So these were made from wheat flour and transformed into a thin paste that became sticky when wet and then solidified, holding the letter closed. And a lot of receipt books for the time had recipes for making wafer seals at home. So you may remember a session about the kinds of household remedies that you would find in those that Lynn Scholes did for the summit in 2021. But essentially, these could be baked into a thin sheet and then cut into pieces. But they were also sold commercially as well. So you can see a tin of those from 1870 where manufacturers would have added some coloring to make them more visually pleasing, maybe a little bit more elegant than the ones you could make at home. But wafers quickly gained popularity because, as Anne noted, they were light, which decreased the cost of postage, and also far less risky around open flames, which we'll get to a bit later on. If you're looking at some old correspondence, another way to spot a wafer seal is by recognizing almost like a perfectly round shadow under the torn or cut portion of the paper. So even expert sealing wax users rarely make a perfect circle of wax. And if the wafer was still moist, sometimes a crossed hatched tool was often pressed into the paper to help it bite into that softened paste. So that may have left a waffled impression or a distinctive pattern of little points in the paper. And I think you can see, or I hope you can see, a little bit of that in the close-up of the seal from the Jane Austen letter on the left. But additionally, even if the letter's seal was ripped or torn away like these examples, another way to spot a wafer is that their placement is often different on the page. So sealing wax was daubed across like the flap of the letter, while wafers were more commonly slipped under the flap. So in these examples, you can see the left edge of the paper on the pieces that have been torn away indicates they were slipped under the edge of the paper to seal it rather than being applied across both edges. And while wafers were cost effective, they lacked the tactile and visual appeal of wax seals, which is what brings us to their continued use today. Obviously, now we have different security and authentication measures in dealing with correspondence, but what remains about wax seals is that beauty and the symbology that sealing with wax can have. They are still something personally handcrafted that can be imbued with meaning and care, and that can contain a little bit of extra messaging in themselves. So on a surface level, they are just still very pretty and can dress up gifts or invitations. So there's still plenty to love about wax sealing, which is why I wanted to do a little bit of hands-on learning at the summit. So to start off, if you brought some supplies, feel free to follow along with me. We're going to talk about the traditional method first. That method would include a stick of sealing wax, either with or without a wick, a metal or wooden stamp with a chosen design of your choosing, a candle or a small lamp. Modern improvisation could be a lighter, but then of course you'll want a piece of paper or an envelope to apply the seal to. As you may note from this slide, I personally don't have a great track record working with this method, and you can see an example of one of the first seals that I made, which actually caught on fire. Hilariously, I actually encountered the passage below from Anne while working on some transcriptions about a week after that incident. It's just a little too late to get that handy reminder. So in preparation for today, I did give it another shot using this method, but with the reverse camera, and I can see that I'm short on time. I think I'm actually going to skip this and not rush and worry about that flame. So I'll just talk through this step and then we'll get to some of the more modern methods. Whoop, sorry. Okay, so if you are new to this and you're worried about being precise with your wax seal, one of the options that you have is to actually draw I lost my other little camera. There we go. Draw a little like circle around the target area around the stamp that you're using, and just give you an idea of where you're going to drip that wax. So if you are using sealing wax that have wicks built into them, some of them don't have that. What you'll want to do is hold that above the flame or candle at about a 45-degree angle, but not directly in it. So remember Anne's advice, the wax should never touch the flame. Once the wax is soft and melting, you can either drip it or press the end of the stick into the paper and deposit that melted wax. So usually I count to about 10 to hold that in place, because you want the wax to cool in order to set around that design. If it's too hot, it will come off as you pull away the stamp. And so you'll kind of want to like carefully lift up the edge of that. If you feel it sticking, the wax hasn't thoroughly cooled, and you'll want to give it another few seconds. It's also important to let your stamp itself cool down between uses. And an option to speed that up if you're doing multiple seals could be to have a bowl of ice to pop the stamp itself in the freezer, or simply just set it aside and let it cool off a bit before you move on to the next one. So this one, I will go ahead and attempt, because I have the aid of a little spoon here. I think the Summit Squad just got really nervous as soon as I got off that lighter. So for this one, we're going to talk about using wax beads with a metal spoon, or a purpose-bought container for melting, or a low-temperature glue gun and wax sticks made for those. So if you brought along some additional things like some ribbon or dried flour or paint or gel pens, then I'll touch on that briefly as well. So, okay, so for this one, I don't know how well you can see in this overhead camera, but I don't have any wax beads. I cut up some different little small pieces of a wax stick, however, and we're going to hold that over here. And the benefit of using a spoon instead of dripping the wax onto the paper is that it actually gives you a much more controlled pour. And then another benefit is you can see in that image on screen that like you have the option to mix different wax beads or colors to get that marbling effect, which can be really pretty. I'm gonna hold this a bit low. I'm gonna hold it a bit lower to try and speed up my wax melting. Apologize if my fire alarm goes off during this presentation. Okay. Again, you just want to avoid direct contact between the wax and the flame. If you have a spoon that doesn't necessarily have the high edges like the one that I'm using does, there can be a little bit of risk to that. That first seal that I used that you saw a photo of previously, I was just using a regular kitchen spoon, and that's why the wax got so close to the edge of the spoon and caught on fire. Yeah, I see some comments in the chat. I think some of the squad probably had like 911 on speed dial. So this is a little bit slower. You can see that the wax is melting. Not super fast. I am aware of the time. I might also skip the finish of this method and move on to the speedier one, just so we can kind of get through these options. But again, the time and care of this also is part of that process that was like the ritual of doing this and taking that care with sealing our correspondence. So it's pretty close. I don't know if you guys can see that in the camera. I'm going to go ahead and blow out the flame just to put everybody at ease, and we'll move on to the glue gun method. Okay. Sorry, wax. Here, we'll do a little bit of a pour. So there's still some big chunks there. We're just going to use this guy. And you have a little bit of time while it's soft that you can kind of move that wax around and press down into that, again, holding it for about 10 seconds or so, giving that wax time to cool. Giant thermometer in the background. Yeah. Okay, so the other method I am more prepared for. We're going to talk about glue guns, which are my favorite because they completely remove the risk of using the open flame, and they really help streamline this process if you're a little bit more impatient, like myself, without sacrificing the end result in terms of aesthetic. So I've had this glue gun plugged in for a little bit since we started the presentation, but it normally would take a few minutes to heat up. Every now and then you could give it a couple squeezes just to make sure that the wax is heated up to the right temperature in order to get some of that wax out. But once it is, you should be able to just squeeze it out onto the paper. And depending on the size of your stamp, you might notice that some of these that I have are a little different in size. So you want to try and take that into account and pour a little bit larger or squeeze a little bit larger than the area for the seal that you're using. So the seal that I'm using, I did about 2 squeezes of wax there. And again, just while it's still soft, you have a little bit of time where you can kind of use the edge of the seal to move that wax around to try to get that nice circle shape. I am on a slanted table for my summit setup today, so mine will have one fatter edge than the other. But while this is cooling, I'll just mention that, again, like that was extremely fast compared to waiting for the wax beads to melt over the spoon. So it's an excellent method for producing multiple seals quickly. I actually have 2 low temperature glue guns so that I can alternate between different colors if I'm doing a batch of Christmas cards or putting seals on wrapped gifts. And so the thing that I love about this method, other than not having the open flame, is that it's just much quicker to produce these. And again, you still get the element of that traditional, look, but they make up for it with like versatility and ease, and are still beautiful and add personal touches. You can still have those personal elements of the design that you're choosing, the color of wax, as well as some extra personal touches. So I don't think we'll have time to experiment with these today. I apologize for running long on time, but I do want to mention a few things that you can do to go a step further and add a little more creativity to your seals. So I do have one. This one's actually about ready to remove, so hold that a bit closer there. I do have one here already pressed as well that I'll demonstrate. My girlfriend got me this gold pen for this purpose, which is specifically made for drawing on wax seals. Previously, like I'd also used paint, just like a really fine tipped toothbrush. And the benefit of these is that you can add a little bit of color to the raised elements in your seal just to help them stand out. But just in terms of adding another color that's a contrast to the color of the seal itself, just makes the mark that is pressed into the wax a little bit more visible. I don't know if when the light is shining on that, if you guys can see that a little bit better. Other ornate touches you can do is using a piece of ribbon or some dried flowers. So you can buy dried flowers if you need to, and use some of those. Or if you're really trying to add some extra meaning, one of the things that I do is keep like baby's breath or flower petals from arrangements that, again, my girlfriend or I have sent each other. So just adding like little personal touches into there can just add a pop of color, You can see some of the seals that I've got on the slide there, incorporating some of those things, or putting the flower petals under a stick of clear wax or on top of white. So I've got some glue sticks here. One of them is vellum, which is a bit more transparent, like the photo on the top on the right. And then the unicorn seal is just white with some flower petals kind of dropped onto the top of that. So another thing I was going to mention is you can find some really great examples of other methods. So using wax in part of, you can apply the wax to a portion of the seal if you wanted to use a different color, and then kind of scrape that wax off, leaving just the bit that's remaining in the seal itself before pressing it into another color to get the effect of the one on the left there. And then you could also use like stencils to give the outside of the wax seal a different shape. And if you're really looking, oh, I was going to mention quickly, if you have, like, you want to practice, you want to make sure you do send the perfect seal and you don't want to quite apply it directly to the envelope, you can apply it to wax paper, which is an option. And you can get these, get your seals off and then apply some 3M stickers or double stick adhesive dots. That way, when you have time to make the seals, you have the time. Once it's time to start putting them on all your Christmas cards, they're ready to go. And you get the ones that are perfect, not the ones that, you know, you made in the moment. One last lesson from me and from Anne that I learned the hard way. If you're going to try and be cute and seal your correspondence with wax, my advice would be to close the envelope within another envelope, just to protect the seal from the sorting machines. So during COVID, I'd gotten into sending friends some snail mail and was really excited when I started getting the wax seal stuff to send all these letters out. And then getting the photos back from my friends of what they actually received was entertainment in itself. So if you do decide to risk it, make sure you fully enclose the envelope prior to stamping or adhering your wax seal. Whether you're sealing a love letter or an individual document, just know that you are participating in a tradition that has been cherished and evolved over centuries, a tradition that continues to blend function with artistry. If you're interested in wax seals and a Lister and her correspondence, we do have that wax seal and stamps tracker on Packed with Potential, which is open for contributors, as well as everyone just to take to view and take a look at what they were all sending each other or using on their personal correspondence. And of course, if you have other questions, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is the same. Feel free to reach out or just tag me in photos of seals that you've made and want to show off. I apologize that I took up so much time with the presentation. We didn't actually get to interact a little bit more with the workshop, but thank you everybody for attending, and tag me in your seal photos. Do we have time for questions? Am I not over time?
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Does anybody have a question? Are there questions in the chat? Yeah, USPS does not like wax seals on envelopes. Yeah, if you can find a larger envelope and tuck it into that, works a little bit better. Stick it in a box with a gift. For Patty, a lot of, if you didn't attend the copyright session that Ruth hosted from West Yorkshire Archive Service, that will definitely be one to take a look at when the recordings are up. Correspondence has a completely different set of copyright issues to consider when talking about publishing documents and stuff. The journals are unique in the sense that they are A-listers, they have been published. Sharing those images is just a different thing. Who makes the seals? Where can I get a customized one? Ooh, there are some great websites. I will recommend Artisair. They were named under one of the photos that I use. They make some different like colors of wax sticks for glue guns. You can also get, you know, some cheaper stuff that maybe looks like that older red wax that's more common on the documents that we see in archives. Yeah, seals have different limitations. Like Kat said, the Malario seal that Sabella or that Anne had cut for Sabella, the owner that made that seal, that shop is still a shop today. So they still have copyright to that mark. So it just gets very complicated. Leave the seal down for about 10 seconds or until it stops coming up when you're pulling the stamp up, Livia. Okay, I think I've reached my time. Thank you again, everybody. Hit me up with more questions or again, just to show off your pretty photos. Thank you.